Hi Year 5, I'm going to read to you the next part of Chapter 4. Someone was bending over me, shaking me, talking to me. I could not understand a word that was being said, but it didn't matter. I felt Stella's hot breath on my face, her tongue licking my ear. She was safe, I was safe, all was well. I was woken by a howling, like the howling of a gale through the masts. I looked about me. There were no masts above me. There were no sails, no movement under me either, no breath of wind. Stella Artois was barking, but some way off. I was not on a boat at all, but lying stretched out on sand. The howling became a screaming, a fearful crescendo of screeching that died away in its own echoes. I sat up. I was on a beach, a broad white sweep of sand, with trees growing thick and lush behind me, right down the beach. Then I saw Stella prancing about in the shallows. I called her and she came bounding up out of the sea to greet me, her tail circling wildly. When all the leaping and licking and hugging were done, I struggled to my feet. I was weak all over. I looked all about me. The wide blue sea was as empty as the cloudless sky above. No Peggy Sue, no boat, nothing, no one. I called again and again for my mother and my father. I called until the tears came and I could call no more, until I knew there was no point. I stood there for some time trying to work out how I'd got here, how it was that I'd survived. I had such confused memories of being picked up, of being on board the Peggy Sue. But I knew now I couldn't have been. I must have dreamed it, dreamed the whole thing. I must have clung to my football and kept myself afloat until I washed up. I thought of my football then, but it was nowhere to be seen. Stella, of course, was unconcerned about all the whys and wherefores. She kept bringing me sticks to throw, and would go galloping after them into the sea without a care in the world. Then came the howling again from the trees, and the hackles went up on Stella's neck. She charged up the beach, barking and barking, until she was sure that she had silenced the last of those echoes. It was a musical. Howling this time, not at all menacing. I thought I recognised it. I'd heard howling like it once before on a visit to London Zoo. Gibbons. Funky gibbons, my father had called them. I still don't know why to this day, but I loved the sound of the word funky. Perhaps that was why I remembered what they were. It's only gibbons, I just told Stella, just funky gibbons. They won't hurt us. But I couldn't be at all sure that I was actually right. From where I now stood, I could see that the forest grew more sparsely up the side of a great hill some way inland, and it occurred to me then that if I could reach the bare rocky outcrop at the summit, I'd be able to see further out to sea. Or perhaps there'd be some sort of house or farm further inland, or maybe even a road that I could use to help find somebody. But if I left the beach and they came back looking for me, what then? I decided I would have to take that chance. I set off at a run, Stella at my heels, and soon found myself in the cooling shade of the forest. I discovered a narrow track going uphill in the right direction, I thought. So I followed it, only slowing to a walk when the hill became too steep. The forest was alive with creatures. Birds cackled and screeched high above me, and always the howling wailed and wafted through the trees, but more distantly now. It wasn't the sounds of the forest that bothered me though, it was the eyes. I felt as if I was being watched by 1,000 inquisitive eyes. I think Stella did too, for she had been strangely quiet ever since we entered this forest, constantly glancing up at me for reassurance and comfort. I did my best to give it, but she could sense that I too was frightened. What had seemed at first to be a short hike now felt more like a great expedition into the interior. We emerged exhausted from the trees, clambered laboriously up a rocky scree, and stood at long last on the peak. The sun was blazing down. I had not really felt the burning heat of it until then. I scanned the horizon. If there was a sail somewhere out there in the haze, I could not see it. And then it came to me that even if I were to see a sail, what could I do? I couldn't light a fire. I had no matches. I knew about cavemen rubbing sticks together, but had never tried it. I looked all around me. Sea, sea, sea. Nothing but sea on all sides. I was on an island. I was alone. The island looked perhaps 2 or 3 miles in length, no more. It was shaped a bit like an elongated peanut, but longer at one end than the other. There was a long swathe of brilliant white beach on both sides of the island, and at the far end, another hill. The slopes steeper and more thickly wooded, but not as high as mine. With the exception of these twin peaks at the centre of the island, seemed to be covered with forest. So far as I could see, there was no sign of any human life. Even then, as I stood there that first morning, filled with apprehension at the terrifying implications of my dreadful situation, I remembered thinking how wonderful it was, a green jewel of an island, framed in white, the sea all about it in a silken shimmering blue. Strangely, perhaps comforted somehow by the extraordinary beauty of the place, I was not at all downhearted. On the contrary, I felt strangely elated. I was alive. Stella was alive. We had survived. I sat down in the shadow of a great rock. The gibbons set up a renewed chorus of howling and hooting in the forest, and a flock of raucous birds clattered up out of the canopy of the trees below us and flew off across the island to settle in the trees on the hillside opposite. We'll be all right, I told Stella. Mum and Dad, they'll come back for us. They're bound to. They will. They will. Mum will get better and they'll come back. She won't leave us here. She'll find us, you'll see. And all we've got to do is keep a lookout and stay alive. Water. We'll need water. But so do these monkeys, right? We've just got to find it, that's all. And there must be some food too. Fruit or nuts, something like that. Whatever it is they eat, we'll eat. It helped to speak my thoughts out loud to Stella, helped calm my panic. More than anything, it was Stella's companionship that helped me through those first hours on the island. It seemed to make sense not to plunge at once into the forest looking for water. To be honest, I was too frightened anyway. But rather to explore the shoreline first. I might come across a stream or flowing river out into the sea, and with a bit of good luck, on the way, could find something to eat as well. I set off in good spirits, leaping down the scree like a mountain goat. Where monkeys lived, I reasoned, we could live. I kept telling myself that. I soon discovered the track down through the trees was bereft of all edible vegetation. I did see fruit of sorts, what looked to me like a fruit anyway. There were coconuts up there too, but the trees were all impossible to climb. Some rose 100 feet, some 200 feet from the forest floor. I had never seen such giant trees. At least the intertwining canopy did provide welcome relief from the heat of the day. All the same, I was becoming desperately parched now, and so was Stella. She padded alongside me all the way, her tongue hanging. She kept giving me baleful looks whenever our eyes met. There was no comfort that I could give her. We found our beach once again and set off round the island, keeping wherever possible to the edge of the forest and in the shade. Still, we found no stream. Again, I saw plenty of fruit, but always too high, and the trees were always too smooth or too sheer to climb. I found plenty of coconuts on the ground, but they'd always cracked open and were empty inside. When the beach petered out, we had to strike off into the forest itself. Here too I found a narrow track to follow. The forest became impenetrable at this point, dark and menacing. There was no howling anymore, but something infinitely more sinister. The shiver of leaves, the cracking of twigs, sudden, surreptitious rustlings, and they were all near me, all around me. I was quite sure now, that eyes were watching us.
we were being followed.